Hello everyone, my name is Brett and welcome to the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord. We're a group of like-minded people using John Vervaeke's work to cultivate wisdom, meaning, and communitas. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm. And if you're new to us, you'll find a link to the Discord in the show notes. And if you want to ask your own question, you'll have to join the Discord to do so. So I am pleased to welcome John Vervaeke here once again. Hello, John. How are you?
I'm good, Brett. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it is always a pleasure. All right, let's start with the question. Just give me one. I just lost my place in my file, so apologize for that. Alexandra, I've just sent you an invite. If you'd like to come on and ask a question for John.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great, coming in loud and clear.
Great. Hi, John. How are you?
Hi, Alexandra. I wanted to thank you for all the comments and support you provide for my work. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, look, I'm immersed. So, I've got a really pragmatic kind of question for you. You probably don't remember because you speak to a million people every week, but a couple of months ago I asked for your blessings, kind of facetiously, to modify the philosophical fellowship practice, and you said,
Yeah.
"Oh no, I don't need your blessing," and laughed. But I'm kind of something's bugging me about how things are unfolding. Like when we did the Dialogos weekend, we had to sign an NDA to join in a Circling Institute event, right? And that's
Yes.
totally fair enough because, like, I've been a working musician all my life. I totally get that people should assert intellectual and creative property rights and stuff. But, like, I think it might become really important to clarify where things stand in terms of, like, proprietary interests with these practices. Like, especially because
Yeah.
the community is growing so rapidly and your work's like combinatorially exploding all over the internet. And I mean, what I understand is that your feeling is that it's a Creative Commons, but have you thought about those
Yes.
kind of issues?
So, I mean, the specific practices of philosophical fellowship and dialectic into dialogos, those are mine.
Yep.
In the sense that I innovated them. Now, Chris and Guy work with me on them,
Mhm.
and Guy, of course, is also responsible for the circling. So the dialectic, the circling into Dialogos workshop package, that is shared proprietary. So that's
Nice.
shared ownership with Guy, and as you know, he makes his living out of circling and things like that. So I
Yeah,
allow
absolutely.
to have the ownership. But the specific practices of philosophical fellowship and dialectic into dialogos, those are open share, to my mind.
Mhm.
The one thing I ask for people to do, so this is my one intellectual property demand, is that people give credit
Yeah,
for those
absolutely.
practices. Give credit and
Yeah.
provide, if something really interesting comes up, they provide me with some feedback and things like that. But as far as I can tell, that's the sort of shared understanding for the specific practices of philosophical fellowship. It's related, but it's not identical to Rand Lahav's philosophical contemplative companionship. So it's different. It's inspired, but it's different. And
Mhm.
Rand has noted that himself in an email to me. And like I said, that practice and the dialectic into dialogos practice, the versions of lectio divina I've taught, those are all, yeah, those are all free to use. Like I say, the only thing I ask people to do, like for example, Rob Gray runs philosophical fellowship groups. There's other people out there. I just ask for appropriate credit and involve me when new things or new ideas or new experiences arise. That's my one sort of intellectual property request.
Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, one thing I totally appreciate about you is like you're so meticulous with citations, even in just common conversation. Like I really appreciate that. And just a quick
Thank you.
update is that hopefully I've kind of figured out how to to work the philosophical fellowship around an artwork, and I'm
Oh,
hoping
wow.
to kind of try that out in a few weeks, and I'll definitely let you know how that goes. So
I'm
thank you so much.
You're welcome, Alexandra. One other request is I don't see these practices, especially dialectic into dialogos, being standalone practices.
No.
Um, right? I think you should do some kind of meditative thing, contemplative thing, uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? And lectio divina, philosophical fellowship before you do dialectic into dialogos. But that's a recommendation.
No, no, I totally get the ecology thing, 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Alexandra. I really appreciate your involvement.
And yeah, thank you, Alexandra. Just to note, on the Discord, we've tended to just shorten, I guess, the dialectic into dialogos is just dialogos. We tend to just call it dialogos here, the dialogos exercise or practice. So I guess I should ask you, does that make sense? I noticed you sort of put the dialectic to dialogos, but how do you envision the name of the practice?
I envision the name of the practice as dialectic into dialogos for some significant reasons. I think dialectic is things we can practice and virtues we can cultivate. Dialogos is a process that takes on that is by its very nature takes on a life of its own. You can't make logos appear. It's like the skills of being a good conversationalist. You can practice those skills, but whether or not a great conversation takes place has to be something beyond you, right? So if you think you're making the logos, you have misunderstood it in a fundamental way. So that's why I try to distinguish between dialectic as a practice, and that, of course, is Plato's name for the practice and Plotinus's name for the practice, and dialogos as the process that emerges of its own accord, right, within practice. The practice affords the actualization of dialogos,
Right.
but it doesn't make it. It doesn't
So
produce it. It's not an algorithm. It's not a
dialogos is sort of the aim of what you hope to achieve by the practice of dialectic.
Yes, you want to participate in dialogos. You want it to
Right.
catch fire. You can put all the wood together and you can strike the spark. That's not the same as the fire catching.
All right, so maybe we'll consider switching our events to dialectic rather than, I think dialectic into dialogos is a little too long sometimes to just say, but we can change it to dialectic. All right, great. Ryan asks, John, how can we defend ourselves from inflation of our own self-concept while remaining in pursuit of the transpersonal? How do the practices you have published in your meditation series help us to avoid the pitfalls of Jungian inflation and the suffering that they entail? How would you recommend approaching your meditation series, and what other services would you recommend to most effectively overcome psychological obstacles such as Jungian inflation and parasitic processes? P.S. I welcome the aporia.
That's an excellent question. And there's some ways in which uh, the meditation course, even with the cultivation of wisdom second course, is still sort of incomplete around this issue. Um, this is something that's coming to the fore as I'm working on After Socrates, which I will be starting to film and record in August. So that's now set to go. Um, and this is the whole tradition, beginning with Socrates, culminating in people like Nicholas of Cusa of learn and learned ignorance. And so these are practices that are designed to move you from the proposition of epistemic humility to the actual pursuit of epistemic humility, which are right, which is the most significant way I think that this tradition sees, um, or, sorry, not sees, well, sees and presents in order to safeguard against inflation and related phenomena like projection, and narcissism, all of these various things that circle around an inordinate salience of the center of egocentrism. Um, and so it's a practice, and I'm working with other people around this practice, but I have mentioned how to do it. Um, and I think the practice of learned ignorance as a daily practice is important. I think another thing to deal with, inflation is an important, and these two things are related, deeply related, is a deep internal dialogue practice, um, internal family systems theory. Therapy is a good example, but some of the things that Steve March, who I just talked to, does in his Aletheia coaching, I think are important. Even the way Steve frames it as self unfoldment rather than self improvement, I think it is very necessary. So I think those are things you can do at the practice level, and then at the worldview level. And of course, as I've emphasized, these two things like feed into each other. Things emerge up towards the worldview and emanate down from it. Emerge out of the practice and emanate down from your worldview. Um, I think a worldview that uh, is conducive to this is one that is how do I want to say this? Give me a second. It's a worldview that does this. Just like individual practice is about overcoming egocentrism, your worldview has to be reconfigured around not being anthropocentric. Um, and, and integrating those two things together, they powerfully reinforce each other. Because we often are cryptically egocentric by valorizing and even ossifying a worldview that implicitly makes us, puts us at the center because it has an implicit and deep anthropocentric orientation. And I think I was talking with Bruce Alderman, Layman Pascal. This will come out in the next episode of their Reinventing Religio series that the three of us have been doing together. I've been talking about this is part of what it would mean to actually grieve the death of the traditional God, because that God is bound up with a particular notion of intelligibility that has a cognitive cultural grammar of anthropocentrism, and we need to break out of that. So there's more, but there are bottom up practices you can do, and there is also the difficult philosophical task of trying to reconfigure your worldview in a way that is not just conceptual, but in a way that emanates into the perspectival and the procedural and the participatory. And these two will mutually reinforce each other. So what you want to do on the individual side is you want to do these set of things, cultivate genuine humility on the worldview level. What are you doing that properly cultivates the virtue of reverence? The reverence is the virtuous induction and interpretation of awe. And what awe experiences do is shrink the sense of the self without creating the sense of threat. And it's very interesting that we have this capacity. There's even it's observational, it's not experimental, but observational evidence that other primates are capable of awe. And so that is something that needs to be properly exapted. So that's where my thinking is right now on how to address this perennial problem of inflation.
Thank you. Bebop, you have a question for John.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great, this is really weird. Okay, I guess I'll start with a pretense. This is a long question and a really, sprawling, weird question, so I apologize for that.
Okay.
And the second pretense is, in programming, there's a kind of saying that when you finally finish solving a programming problem, you have enough information to start solving it. And so that relates because I'm not really sure how to ask this question, and if I knew the answer, I'd know how to ask the question. So It starts like this. The question has to do with how I feel pretty unsure of everything. I feel deeply that there is no firm ground to stand on. The question is about and also this question is about the perception that truth is paradoxical in nature to me. One antidote to being unsure about everything is to become aware of the unarguable truth or like certainty or knownness of pure experience, in contrast with being unsure about everything. I'm pretty sure this is one of the 4 types of knowing, but it's not coming to me right now. My continued unsureness, though, is supported by pointing towards the problematic nature of truth / certainty / knownness in and of itself, not of experience. To elaborate, truth / certainty, etc., can be questioned. As an example, we have a notion, and then we can ask ourselves, why is that notion true or certain or known? And then we can come up with answers. We can continue doing this, asking why recursively up until a point, and then up until a point it seems to be true because it's true, it's self-evident. This seems okay to me until you realize that truth and your notions of truth and knownness and certainty can be wrong, and because of this we can change our minds. So on one hand we have this element of fundamental truth that is self-evident, that kind of begs the question, it's true because it's true, and on the other hand it is subject to change, and so it is not self-evident, and the bit where this question gets kind of, in a sense, combinatorially explosive or turns into a complex system, if you're familiar with that, is that it seems to me like this structure of truth bends in on itself and breaks itself, which means that to any of the sentences I just said, you could apply this, recursive truth being paradoxical, and that creates all sorts of problems in my mind. And also that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to put into language, let alone articulate well succinctly. And lastly, that's not to do a propositional trick to move away from the purity of pure experience, but to articulate an experientially based problem I have with experientially mediated truth, certainty, knownness, etc. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that paradox, and once again, sorry for the long sprawling question.
Yeah, no, it was very coherent and clear. I didn't think it was sprawling at all.
Thank you.
So I mean, there's an implicit notion of truth in there that, of course, has been questioned pretty much since the 19th century, with various pragmatism in the United States and phenomenology, and Heidegger's alethetic notion of truth, and so you did it several times. So I'm wondering if you do sort of take a Cartesian approach, that truth equals certainty, which is to move from presumably a transcendental property of relation to a psychological state. See, the problem in Descartes, and the problem that people bump up against this, is Descartes equivocates between 2 notions of certainty. One notion is certainty is something that's eternally unchanging, an eternally unchangeable fact about reality, and how we get access to that then, of course, becomes the central problem. And then his answer to that is something like psychological certainty. I can no longer doubt it. And many people have pointed out for a very long time, and I even think Descartes was aware of it. Augustine seems to be aware of it in his version. Right? Those 2 senses of certainty are actually very, very far from each other, and there's no clear reason to believe that psychological indubitability gives you any kind of cognitive access to eternal, unchanging facts. So what I'm trying to point out is that the notion of truth as certainty is inherently actually problematic, and verges on being self-contradictory itself. So for that reason...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, that makes a lot of sense to me. To kind of repeat what you're saying, it's like I'm using these words true / certain / known, and I'm kind of pointing towards a problematic definition of truth itself.
Yes.
The only thing that I have issue with that is that I'm trying to bring forth that by using all of those words purposely interchangeably and trying to bring forth a kind of notion that seems like the only access to truth, or the guiding notion of truth we have, is that experientially based, or maybe, as you put it, psychological feeling of truth. What?
Well, I think there's a little bit more to it than that, and that I think our notion of truth is always a retrospective notion, and we try to pretend that it's a prospective notion. What I mean by that is we only make determination of truth when we have self-transcended an error or falsity. This is
Yes.
Merleau-Ponty's point. We only point to something as an illusion when we have transcended it by something that we comparatively deem more real. So all we and again, I think we forget this in a profound way. Our attributions of truth are always retrospective, and then we keep looking for a prospective definition of truth. I think that's a quixotic thing. That is to presume that there's some sort of final solution to Meno's paradox, which is how you actually began this discussion, right? Is if I don't know it, how could I possibly recognize it? And if I already know it, why would I look for it, right? And that and
Yeah.
right, this is at the key of it. And so, I mean, for me, and Spinoza comes closest for me to getting this when he says, "Truth is its own standard." He doesn't mean self-evident the way like it means in the the American
Right.
Declaration of Independence or something like that, because that's foundationalism, and most philosophers, myself included, reject foundationalism as an epistemology. So instead, I think he means is something like, no. When we participate in self-transcendence, that act is the closest we get to truth. Truth isn't a final state or statement. Truth is whatever affords the self-transcendence by which we can retrospectively attribute falsity to other things.
I I think that's a good answer, and an answer that I'll have to process. But if I may, my one pushback would, or perhaps this is showing my ignorance, that my pushback would be that it seems like that it's the same. It's the same aspect of truth on both sides of the equation, before and after. It's that the facts might change, but the emotion, the feeling of truth is the same on both sides, if that makes sense.
I don't know. It's again, I think it's the feeling of correction, which isn't quite the same thing as the feeling. Like I think truth is pointing to the fact. If we're pointing at a fact, I think we're pointing to something inexhaustible about the way cognition and reality together that allows us to continually discover ways in which we have been in error. I'm not saying that Popper's falsificationism is the answer here, but something sort of phenomenologically analogous to it, right? The fact that you're posing this question and problem is exemplifying the very capacity I'm pointing to.
Right, of self-transcendence.
And being able to retrospectively, reflectively look back and say,
Yes,
there's something
that's
limiting,
right.
something false, something inadequate about that.
Yeah.
I have a processual, allothetic notion of truth. That's what I'm arguing for.
I'm definitely going to look that up after this. Thank you.
You're welcome. That was. I'm really grateful that you asked me that question. Actually, I've never had a chance to sort of explicitly lay that out. So thank you for that.
I really appreciate that. And just for some context, I'm Toriko on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Claude writes, I'd like to ask you the question of utmost personal and universal relevance, the greatest mystery, which is also the greatest taboo, the gigantic and blatant elephant left unnoticed in most rooms. Why are we here at all? How do you feel about having been thrown here in this world, amid time and space? What kind of miracle are we living? And why, this might be the most baffling, why do most people notice it so infrequently, and why is it never spoken in public, like Voldemort's name we dare not pronounce?
I think people used to speak it more frequently. I think one of the functions of religion, and again, I always caveat this by saying there's all kinds of malfunctions of it. One of the functions of religion and the orientation towards the sacred was to remember, in Plato's deep sense of anamnesis, to remember, not just to recall, but to remember, to relive, to reparticipate, to recognize, what that word originally meant, to recognize and reparticipate the sense of sheer miraculousness being, how it's simultaneously the most miraculous and the most mundane. And as we move from the mundane to the miraculous, we're doing emergence. As we move from the miraculous to the mundane, we're doing emanation. Since we've lost the dialectic of emergence and emanation, we have suffered a kind of flattening of our ontology. And we've suffered an inability to remember deeply vibrancy of that. I mean, that's what happens when you do these practices of learned ignorance. You get Nicholas of Cusa talks about this wall, the wall surrounding paradise, the wall where you reach the horizon, the ultimate horizon of intelligibility, and then you look into something that is wondrous. It feeds back, and you see that everything is caught up in that. So I think part of the problem we're facing, and this is a version of Nietzsche's point. I was talking again about Bruce and Lehman about this, but I think Nietzsche's point is lopsided. Nietzsche talked about the fact that we had a two worlds mythology. This is part of my critique of two worlds mythology, that gave all wonder and value to the transcendent world. Then this world was the world of suffering and delusion, etc. This world doesn't have any intrinsic value. It only has an instrumental value. It's only valuable insofar as it helps us get to the heaven of the transcendent world. And then as that transcendent world was understood as the supernatural world, this is a part of the argument of awakening from the meaning crisis, is that when the transcendent became identified with the supernatural, and then the supernatural became absurd, we lost that transcendent world, and then we were left with a world that we had been tutored millennia to regard as merely of instrumental value, having no inherent value. It was mundane in a way that did not point to the miraculous, or neither did it receive from the miraculous. I'm using that term in reference to your question. I'm not using it in the way that C.S. Lewis would use it. And you can see that my discussions with J.P. Marceau and Paul Vanderklee about that. But what I was talking about with Bruce and Lehman is that we're suffering a double death. Not only have we lost the transcendent, but the attempts, which have been sort of prominent, postmodern, broadly construed, to find the sacred within the imminent, sort of a Deleuzian idea. I think these are seriously undermined by the fact that most people are finding this world to be corrupt. And I mean that in the moral political sense, the socio-cultural world. I also, more importantly, even mean it in the environmental sense, that the world is poisoned and dying. And so it is hard to find miraculous or the sacred in this double death. Transcendent has died. We've been thrown into the imminent. We've been trying to make the imminent intrinsically valuable, but we are deeply thwarted by the realities of both our social cultural imminence and our environmental imminence. And so I think for that reason, it's getting very, very hard for people to get free of a flat ontology and to recover that astonishing wonder. Pearl talks about it beautifully in his book on the whole Platonic tradition, Thinking Being, about there was a time when ontology was properly understood as a religious practice. I wonder how many academic philosophers would like me saying that, but in the sense that it was designed to awaken ultimately awe. It was therefore supposed to overlap with ritual practice. think one of the significant differences between Plato and Aristotle is how they relate to experience of wonder. Plato is you can see his philosophy is trying to to deepen wonder into awe and then to tutor awe into reverence. Whereas Aristotle is trying to understand wonder more as curiosity, although he has his Platonic moments, I want to acknowledge that, but generally how Aristotle's been taken up, he wants to turn wonder into curiosity, and it results in knowledge, which of course is a very important thing. And we have taken a long Aristotelian turn, and then we've gone through the meaning crisis and Nietzsche, and now we're facing the meta crisis. And I think all of these things have undermined the religion and the philosophical traditions that would allow us to see the emergence of the miraculous from the mundane, see the emanation of the miraculous into the mundane.
Thank you. Lynn, so nice to see you. You have a question for John.
So is this magical box working?
This magical box is working. Lynn has asked several questions in the past in writing, but she's been nervous to ask one in voice, and I'm very happy that she's speaking up today. So that's fantastic.
As am I. It's a pleasure to meet you, Lynn.
Nice to meet you too. I've been participating in the Sangha now for 2 years. So I want to say to everyone listening and to you, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
All right. The question that I have is, in my experience of philosophical fellowship, circling, and lectio divina. So in my experience with philosophical fellowship, I experienced people that get all excited and then they participate for a while, and then perhaps one philosophical fellowship, and then I get ghosted, or it just doesn't become exciting anymore, and it gets dropped. And then I've also experienced in circling how some people say that they're concerned that circling evokes emotional trauma within the group, or if the person leading it or the people within it aren't doing it properly, that perhaps emotional harm can come to the participants. And this could be challenging, I guess, if there's a leaderless group, is when so that whole dynamic of this concern about emotional trauma in circling. And the third thing about lectio divina that I've experienced is I've had people say that it's very traumatic, that I personally have experienced lectio divina as a way of looking into a shadow and throwing out things that I need to look at. But perhaps an outside person a person did participate, and then they said that looked traumatic, and it looked like, I don't know, an atomic bomb. It looked like hell. That's not something I'm going to participate in. Anyway, so with those 3 experiences, my question is, do you have any advice for ways of engagement with these 3 types of people that I've experienced on your Sangha?
Oh, wow. That's really a deep, difficult question. I'll answer the circling one first. Don't think people should be doing circling without a person who's been properly trained in the facilitation of it. And that's why I respect either Taylor or Guy. They're properly experienced and they have the background training. I think, and it's not something I can mandate because this Discord is not mine in any way. I think people who are leaders, and this is true of me, by the way, They should have extensive psychotherapeutic training of some kind. I think it should be mixed. I've done EFT, IFS, and CBT. I think there should be people in these groups that have that. Like I said, I'm not in a position of authority to mandate this here, but um, if I ever set up the sort of Wisdom Institute, um, that will be one of the features I want to put in. The problem with mandating that um, is it then would hold this whole process hostage to the psychotherapeutic community, which, well, if you watch the series I'm doing with Greg Enriquez and Gary Ovanesian, I have some significant philosophical criticisms of psychotherapy right now. Um, so it's a bit of a bind question. I think people should have training, at least some people, for things like circling. I'm not really familiar with this coming up. I am familiar with it coming up in things like circling. I've participated in circling. I'm not quite clear about how it comes up in lectio. Uh, I guess I would need to know a bit more of the specifics of that. Um,
And just to clarify,
so,
John, we've got a practice here on the Discord where where we've adapted your practice into a sort of a group context. So we have sort of an adaptation of lectio. And I think we played for you a recording way back when. That's the context that I think Lynn is talking about.
right. I suppose then one of the things that I would want to make sure is that people have an individual lectio practice that they're doing very solidly on their own before bringing it into the group lectio. Um, and like I've always said, that these practices have to be coordinated with mindfulness practices and active open-mindedness practices, so that people are aware of issues around self-deception. The philosophical fellowship, I'm very cognizant of this, especially the whole process, the whole workshop. Christer Master Pietro and I have been talking about projection, and it sounded like you've encountered some projection experiences. Typically, when people have that kind of profound sort of cognitive appraisal and emotional withdrawal, there's an aspect of projection going on. So incorporating some shadow work and projection recognition practices is also something that Chris and Guy and I are working on to try and address some of these concerns. So I don't know if I have a single answer. I've tried to address it more sort of practice by practice. I do share your concern with that this could, and I even said it when I was doing the meditation course, but I even cautioned, you're doing this meditation practice, these kinds of things are happening to you, trauma indicators, stop the practice, right, and get therapy, get help. I think that should just generally be the case. If people are getting a traumatic experience, it's like, okay, take this as a very helpful thing. Don't do the practice anymore, but the fact that you have unprocessed trauma is now your practice. That's what you've got to address.
Should I ask those people, I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but
please,
should I ask those people not to participate then in Lectio Divina? Because this last week that came up, and I didn't feel like this person should participate, and I asked this person not to participate anymore because I didn't feel as though that this person was in a emotional capacity to
yes.
to do it.
And I understand your reticence. I mean, like, because it seems like an imposition of authority, but I think it's actually an act of compassion. If somebody is showing signs of trauma and nobody in the group has the requisite psychotherapeutic training, then they should be directed to seek that out. That should be the primary thing that happens right away. What I was trying to address, Lynn, and please interrupt me again if you need to. I was trying to address that gray zone. It's not clear that this is a psychotherapeutic reaction, but it doesn't seem to be quite falling within the practice, and that's what I was trying to address. With there should be qualified people encircling. People should have their own well-established individual lectio practice, which I've always said, by the way, in addition to any group practice, and and then lastly that we do need to incorporate, and I'm working on it with Chris and Chloe Valdery and Taylor. We do need to incorporate some shadow work and projection recognition practices into our ecologies of practices. And then finally, have to be doing the practices that give us clear thinking, that give us space and distance, the mindfulness practices, the active open-mindedness. Lynn, this is not a good enough answer, but it's the answer I'm working on right now.
Well, I was putting, a boundary up and by telling this person, no, I don't want you to do lectio. And so I felt as though I needed some validation that putting up this boundary was appropriate. And so I appreciate that validation. I enjoy your meditation practice. I've, watched everything. I've listened, well, not everything. Okay. I watched Awakening from the Meaning Crisis and all the meditation and all the wisdom of Hypatia and all that when you did it live. So and I've enjoyed it, and it's really helped me the last 2 years do integration of mystical experiences. So that was my whole intention. So of integrating mystical experiences, and it's really helped me a lot, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you for your guidance.
Thank you for saying that, Lynn. That was one of the things. One of the goals of everything I was doing was precisely to give people a way to integrate mystical experience into something that made sense within their life. I'm glad it had that function for you. That was one of the explicit goals of what I did.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, it's given me a relationship with God, and now I'm in this inquiry about my obligation to God and serving others. Yeah. So this is my inquiry place where I'm at this moment. So that's what it's given me in the last 2 years. So very grateful.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Lynn. Also,
now how do I exit this stage?
I'll get you out. Don't worry.
Oh, kick me out there, darling.
Thanks, Lynn. And just to know, though, it's not the time to talk about it now. But on the Discord, I think we're aware. I think of the risks that you talked about there. We're trying to figure out practices that we can do as a group. We don't have a budget where we can hire a professional facilitators at this point. So it's something that, though. But I appreciate your warnings, and it's something we should be watching out for, and hopefully trying to, and figuring out as we go how to best do it in the safest way for everyone.
Yes, and I'm sorry, Brett. It was not my intent to make an implicit criticism.
Oh no! I don't take it that way. That's something we're certainly aware of, and I look at it as, well, this is just the state of things now. We'd like to have these group practices and work on these things together, and it's not the best of all worlds, but it might be better than not doing it at all. All right.
Great. And I did mean what I say about there's a tension, because like I said, we do not want these emerging communities to be held hostage to the psychotherapeutic community. So there's a problem to be solved there.
Yes.
And I don't quite know how it's going to be solved.
Well, we'll work on it together. Rachel Hayden has a question. What is the role of fun in cognition, as distinct from relaxation, and should it be considered in an ecology of practices? Asking for a friend who does too many serious things out of guilt, gets burned out, and then is more effective after she makes herself have fun for a couple days.
Always a pleasure to get a question from Rachel. I'm looking. Rachel and I are planning to do another Voices with Vervaeke together. I'm looking forward to that. So this goes towards Michael Apter's metamotivational theory, which I think is deserving to have much more awareness and knowledge. So metamotivational theory is the idea that we have two different frames in which we interpret arousal. In the telic frame, we interpret arousal in this fashion. Telic frame is when, and this overlaps to some significant degree with Fromm, which I think is very convergent to plausibility. So in the telic mode, we are doing activities that are not intrinsically valuable to us. They are instrumentally valuable to getting us to some goal state is inherently valuable. So in the telic mode, we interpret arousal as indication of effort towards achieving the goal that is inherently valuable. And the more and more effort we're exerting means that we're still further and further away from the goal, and we're being more and more frustrated in achieving the goal. So intense effort within the telic mode is experienced as noxious. This is, and that if we, and once we get to the end, the release from that effort is the pleasure of relaxation. And so this is pretty right. This is often called a work framing. This is how we understand work. So the paratelic mode is the reverse. The paratelic mode is when you do things, you set up a goal, but the goal is in service of activity that you find inherently pleasurable. And there, arousal marks how much you are participating in the inherently valuable process or practice. And in fact, a drop off in arousal indicates a return to something like boredom. So that's play. And of course, we can do serious play, which is not the same thing as work. That's why I call it serious play. We can do play that has that intense tone to it, positive hedonic tone, but nevertheless is about a very serious developmental process. Of course, we can be engaged in processes that are intrinsically valuable to us, but may not be that deeply developmental for us. And so the prototypical example is, you have it when you're having sex for just having sex. You're enjoying the activity. A good shortcut to find out if you're in the telic or the paratelic mode is, would you like a shortcut? Would you like a shortcut? If I could give you a shortcut that would get you quicker to the end state, so that the process is ended, would you take it? So for example, something that's clearly telic for me is brushing my teeth, because if I could get a shortcut so I didn't have to put in the time, and I could just get to the goal state, I would take it. Of course, I don't want to be graphic here, but I don't want a shortcut in my sexual activity. I don't want to get to as quickly as possible to the end state. But I want to enjoy the fun of it as much as possible. So now to answering your question, Rachel. I think within the play, which is the paratelic mode, there is serious, in which we're really using play developmental engagement. We're really deeply in the being mode. We're exploring the depths of the being mode with play. Right? We do play and we're not exploring the depths of the being mode, but we're still in the paratelic mode. That's fun. And fun is helpful because it can keep us connected to the paratelic mode, and that's helpful. What our culture has tended to do, and many other people have made this criticism, so this is not unique to me, we have split fun off serious play, and so paratelic mode has been distanced from the being mode, and that's a mistake. I think that fun should always be in family with serious play, because serious play is where the paratelic mode gets deeply linked to the being mode. What you're basically doing there is you're playing to develop. Culture has given us the idea of entertainment, which is so when you entertain an idea, think of the original meaning of the word. You're not actually taking it up. You're not engaging in development. You're not aspiring in any way. That's fine. That's fun. If we have entertainment to the extent that it blinds us to serious play, so that the paratelic mode becomes unglued being mode, that's dangerous. So, the idea would be, can people, like, should there be fun practices? I think there are fun practices. I think uh, many people find the savoring practice from the Epicureans a very fun practice. I mean, it does have a developmental import in that it sort of scaffolds you into deeper things. The practice itself, the savoring practice, is a very fun thing to do. And here's the one thing. Um, so, one of the functions of fun was to create, just for its own sake, communitas, just a sharing of sociability, social effervescence, as Durkheim calls it. Of course, we have now individualized entertainment, and we have lost that. But you get a sense of what I'm talking about. Compare watching like one of the Avenger movies by yourself in front of a TV with watching it in a theater with a bunch of other people. Know that the second one's better in some way. It's more fun. Right? So, putting this all together, I think we need to reconnect fun, communitas, and then reconnect fun communitas to serious play so that the being modes and paratelic mode are wedded properly together. That means fun, I think, does have an important function in an ecology of practices.
All right. Hope we can get two more questions in today.
Yeah.
Pat writes, "Hi John, I'm struggling with reconciling the transcendence and imminence of Plato's theory of forms. With regard to imminence, form is the pattern that makes something be what it is, which can be understood as a system of constraints, to pick up on Alicia Ureno's work, or Urero's work. However, with regard to transcendence, form seems to be identified with sameness or commonality. The self-transcendence of understanding is then associated with looking into the depths of commonality. So here's the issue. It strikes me that our definition of the form cannot satisfy both its immanent condition and its transcendent condition simultaneously. This is because in its immanent condition, as the pattern of the whole, I feel like this should include both commonalities and unique, non-repeatable differences. However, all of these differences seem to be negated in its transcendent condition. How do you reconcile the transcendence and immanence of the forms with regard to the problem of sameness and difference?"
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like many people in third wave, I've moved away from the propositional Aristotelian idea of form as the essence which states the universal in a set of necessary and sufficient conditions. There are people out there it's perfectly fine for science, and so there's that's one. That's where that particular interpretation of the forms went, and I think that's. I want to say a lot about that, but if I do, I'll get too sidetracked. So I'll just put that out there as something to note. So, following the third wave and other people, and especially it's such a pleasure to talk to John Rusin about this and other people. I've been trying to do a reintegration of phenomenology, the Platonic theory of the forms, and so this is to go back and really read Plato phenomenologically and remember that form meant the look of something, the aspect of it, right? And the wisdom metaphors are visual, and that's and contact, right? The fact I guess I would be bold. It's maybe hubristic, but I think non-phenomenological interpretations of the theory of the forms I find inherently questionable. And now that I've been learning to read Plato in this third wave, Gonzalez and Highland and all these astonishingly brilliant people, emphasizing the non-propositionality of the forms, the standard way of understanding form as a commonality of features, necessary and sufficient usually, within a conceptual feature list, I think misses the forms in a deep, deep way. This is what I've been trying to explore with Daniel Zaruba and Johannes Niederhauser with when I'm talking about eidetic induction, also working with Dan Chiappi, and I see convergence with John Russin's work in things like bearing witness to epiphany and the musicality of being. So I take a form to be something that is the through line for the multi-aspectuality of anything. The through line is not itself an aspect. That's the way in which it's transcendent. Transcendent. It's not an aspect. It is that which is not an aspect that binds all the aspects together. In a similar way, the through line is not just the through line through multi-aspectuality. It's the through line through multi-perspectival access. This is why dialogos, is so important for the Platonic forms. And you get this, and get a hold of the anthology New Perspectives on Platonic Dialectic, cutting edge stuff on this. And you'll see how this lines up. So it's not only the through line within a multi-aspectuality, it's also the through line through multi-perspectivality. I can't turn that into a noun, which I need to. It would something be multi-perspectivality, something like that. So what we find is the imminence and the transcendence are actually interwoven together phenomenologically. When I'm dealing with, like, I pick up my phone and it's multi-aspectual, and I realize I can't ever see the whole form. I can't ever perceive. I can't ever perceive it all or see it all. There's a through line that transcends any of the aspects and points to the inexhaustibility, the combinatorially explosive nature of the thing, and that through line is not only within things, and I'm doing scare quotes with my hand, also between things. There are systems and patterns in reality that are self-organizing, and I think that points to something like you said. There are systems of constraints that give through lines for all the different perspectives that we can generate between things. So I'm trying to say there's an intra and an inter through line. It's neither a perspective, is that through which all perspectives move. It is neither an aspect, is that which binds all aspects together. Is in that sense real constraints, real systems, real organizations of constraints that give us both the intelligibility of instantiation in a particular thing and in participation in shared patterns of how things interact with other things. Science gets a piece of that with its scientific notion of essence. So whether or not the Platonic forms should be understood as conceptual universals, I think that's a real question. I tend to that the answer is no. Instead, what they reflect are ways in which different through lines are participating in shared sets of constraints that make those kinds of through lines possible. Apparently, Wolfram is talking about this out of all of his, and I got to pick this up because I got to figure out if he's talking about the fact that you find these patterns being repeated everywhere, and he's talking about like that these patterns can be dialed into particular instances. So he's sort of discovering Plato. I wonder if he realizes it. And the thing about these patterns is they're generally computational, and there's a through line running through the computation. But I wouldn't take them as to be complete because I don't think computational accounts of reality are complete. But nevertheless, that's another instance of where people are realizing, wait. I'm getting a sense of this pattern in terms of a program that would run for infinity, and there's a through line for it. I can't really see the whole infinite output of the program, but I can get a sense of that, and I can sometimes grasp it with a formula. And that points to something that is not any particular pattern, but that which is the through line within each pattern, and also, therefore, I guess you would want to say, in this sense, a commonality between the patterns, but it's not a commonality of features, it's a commonality of participatory origin. The long way of saying that way I think you get the imminence and the transcendence together is to move back to Neoplatonic phenomenological interpretation of the forms, and much less an Aristotelian, especially essential notion of the form. The problem with Aristotle is he has two different notions of form, right? He has the structural functional organization and the essential notion, and they don't totally jive with each other. So that's my best attempt to answer what is really a perennial question in philosophy, but I wanted to take time to answer it, because I think tackling the question of how to get the transcendence and the imminence together, that we can deal with the double death of God, we can deal with the loss of the transcendence and the decadence of the imminent. I think that is not just an abstract philosophical problem. I think it is an existentially exigent problem that requires significant phenomenological practice and understanding.
All right, we promised one last question, so hopefully we can squeeze this in. Darkson asked, with so many young men failing to or seeing it as pointless to engage meaningfully with their communities and society at large, what do you think is a possible avenue to appealing to them to try? I recently got myself out of said rut, but I see a lot of young guys, 19 to 28-ish, with no desire to engage with society beyond the minimal to survive. Most mention that the majority constantly telling them that they are intrinsically evil for their forefathers' actions is a definite driving factor among the seeming futility of trying to bring an honest effort forth to such a corrupt system. How could one attempt to help alleviate this kind of defeatist attitude and explain how their disengagement is really what people are hoping for? That by signing off, they're further perpetuating their own suffering in a sense, not trying to, quote, victim blame. But I don't think them resigning or choosing inaction is going to affect any sort of positive change.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've seen some examples very close at hand, my oldest son being one of them, of this. I don't want to get involved in the disgusting politics of culture war. This indoctrinating an entire group of people as that they are the epitome locus of evil in the world is both a simplistic, a stupid narrative because of its oversimplification and its lack of foresight and regard the consequences of such a shallow worldview and such a shallow understanding of history and science. I have a lot of sympathy for what the question is pointing to. This doesn't. I refuse to align myself with any particular political partisanship around this, but I do think the issue of we're making a mistake like the Versailles Treaty. We're taking a group of people and demonizing them and punishing them and creating a simplistic narrative that they are responsible for all the evils of the world, and that they are something equivalent to something like original sin, and there's nothing they can do but feel bad about it, and even feeling bad about it is some sort of contemptuous, pitiable thing. And did we not learn this? Not learn this. The Treaty of Versailles, in which you try to crush people by demonizing them as the source of evil, and the Germans weren't the villains in World War I. The Treaty of Versailles demonized them, and they became the villainous Nazis of World War II. We need to pay attention to history properly understood in its complexity. My concern, and Isn't it borne out? Look at what almost happened in France. Look what's happened in the United States. These people will not remain inactive. Tom was right about that. If you demonize people and you spiritually lobotomize them, they will turn to the one thing that gives them a sense of any kind of connection to reality, which is destructive vengeance. We are in the middle of making a very big mistake. We have to learn properly contextualized criticisms of racism and colonialism, that we do not make the mistake of the Treaty of Versailles. I would say to those people, what I said to my son, I didn't say anything to him. Gave him Spinoza's Religion, the book. Well, gave him books on Neoplatonism. Gave him ways of practicing natus, self-determination, or orthogonal to the current political swamp we have descended into. There are ways. I mean, this is why Jordan Peterson took off, because he gave young males the mythology of the hero, and that was a way orthogonal to the political arena for men to get a sense of self-determination in Spinoza's sense, the cultivation of wisdom, the aspiration to greatness. So we need to make available these alternative formulations for young men. The problem I have with Jordan is hero myth can also be one-sided. The hero myth every Greek hero myth is counterbalanced by a hubris myth of men trying to become gods and failing. We need to get people listening to both kinds of myth. We need to get people engaged in projects of significant self-determination, self-examination, the Socratic and Spinozistic ideals. To say to people that are disengaging is don't engage like with that as a direct criticism. Just try and get them interested in a path towards male maturity that is not caught in either the right wing schismo, which gets disgusting, or the left wing demonization, and instead allows people to pursue what John Rusin is talking about, pursue maturity of virtue, allows them to take responsibility for things like racism and colonialism, but also to celebrate the excellences of virtue. I mean, the problem is that the right and the left both point to something. Right points to the fact that we are not animals. We are called in a way that no other animal is to personal and collective virtue. When the right speaks to that, it is speaking L. Left says, but human beings are finite and they can be crushed by overwhelming forces of fate. And we have to constantly remember this and exercise profound compassion. And these two, this is the parable, Jesus of Nazareth's parable of the prodigal son. There is no resolution of this. There's always only the opponent processing between them. If we could get back to the place where we could say, what we need is the virtue and virtuosity. A strong man is not only virtuous and virtuous, one of the virtues is compassion. So I think we need to give people access to the metapolitical. We need to give them access to ways of pursuing Socratic and Spinozistic virtue. And then ask them to re-engage with the world.
All right, thank you
My answer for that.
Thank you so much for that, John. Thank you for staying a little later tonight. This is fantastic. I just wanted to know Ryan and Alexandra and Lynn all thanked you for your answers to them, and we all thank you for your answers. And I thank all the people who asked questions, and for the people we didn't get to and who held off today. We tried to make room for some new people tonight. So thank you. Thank you to everyone for your patience with that, and we'll get back to just the normal list next month. So thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you very much.
Have a great night.
You too, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, John.